It's just such an honor to be here. You know, this morning listening to Dennis Mckenna and Luis Eduardo Luna and Manuel Torres speaking, and these were the people that I was reading when I was an undergraduate and young graduate student, reading about all this stuff, and to finally meet all of them in one place is just remarkable. So thank you, and for all the people who organize it. So, as an anthropologist, I'm an anthropologist too, like Evgenia, and one of the things that we do is you often, questions that you think you already know the answer, you pose them again and again, because every time, sometimes you surprise yourself by the things that you learn. And so I was looking out the tropical night with an old friend of mine, Matsigenka friend of mine, Merino, and in Machiguenga there's this grammatical distinction. Like in French or Spanish, you have masculine and feminine nouns. Well, in Machiguenga, they have that same distinction, but it's between animate and inanimate things. But the way they consider animate and inanimate is not the way we do. Because most plants are not animate. And yet most animals are, and then other things like stars, moon are. And so it seems that the animacy has more to do with locomotion, willful locomotion. So most plants aren't animate because they can't walk and so on. And so I was thinking about this, and we'd done some tobacco snuff, and I was thinking about this, and so I asked him, so Marino, why is it that you treat stars and the moon and the sun as animate things? And he said, well, because they have bodies. And I thought about it, and it struck me as being a bit strange, because of course we talk about stars and moons and planets as being celestial bodies, but that's not what we mean. When we call something a celestial body, we're talking about it as being a physical object. I said, well, what do you mean they have bodies? Well, they're people. They have human bodies. So when he called them celestial bodies, when he called them bodies, he wasn't saying that they're inert matter. Like when we say celestial bodies, we're referring to their inert matterness of the thing. What he was saying when he called them bodies is that they're human beings. They have human bodies, and that their animacy comes from their human nature. And so in a context like this, if we looked up at the stars and the moon, and someone asked us from this world, why do you call them animate? We'd probably say because they have souls. But what he said was that they have human bodies. And so this idea that these concepts of body and soul are very fluid among these peoples. And so on the other side of the coin, I was asking, well, certain plants have souls. Most plants don't have souls because they don't have human bodies. They don't walk around. But some certain plants have souls. And I know ayahuasca, Brugmansia, all these psychoactive plants have souls. So I said, well, tell me about plants that have souls. And it was surprising, again, asking the same question, you get surprising answers. Which plants have souls? And the first two things that came out of his mouth were not what I was expecting. He said, well, Katawa has a soul. Hira crepitans, it's this horrible, this spiny plant. It's got this, if you cut down the tree, it's got this battery acid it's like the sap is a battery acid. It can make you go blind. It's got these explosively dehiscent fruits that can throw the fruit, when they ripen, they can throw the fruit 100 feet. Some people call it dynamite tree because it makes this huge explosion. It's this really aggressive plant. And he said, well, Katawa has a soul. Why does Katawa have a soul? Well, if you try and cut it down and you're not careful, it'll go into your eye and make you blind. And then the second example he gave was bamboo, the bamboo that they use to make arrows. And I said, well, why does that have a soul? Well, if you make arrows when your wife is pregnant, then the sharpness and the caustic fur, there's sort of like these little urticating hairs on the bamboo. It'll make your child bleed, and you could lose your baby. So when I asked him which plants have souls, he chose to focus on plants that had really noxious spiritual and physical properties. And so this is sort of what everyone's talking about Viveros de Castro today. He seems to be the word of the day. So he has this, there's no pointer, is there? He has this article called, he talks about ethnography as being a process of controlled equivocation, which means that when you encounter concepts among indigenous people that shock your own conception of those concepts, it makes you stop and reconsider what are the philosophical implications of the terms you're using when they're being used in a different way. And so in Machiguenga, the word for soul can be used for a soul of a human being or a spirit, But when they, in the animate form, I is animate, O is inanimate, like masculine, feminine. But when they talk about plants, ocd, like I said, many plants are not animate. They don't have souls. It's only certain noxious plants and psychoactive plants that have souls. When they say ocd of a plant, they can be talking about the pith of a plant, or the heartwood in a tree is called ocd. And also, when you make any kind of medicinal preparation, whether it's psychoactive or just medicinal, they'll say you put the leaves in the water and you boil it. And the water turns green or red, the water changes the color. And that's because the soul of the plant has infused the decoction, the potion. And then when you drink that potion, the soul in the water then infuses your muscles and bones and blood with that. So their concept of the spirit of a plant approaches what we would call the pharmacologically active principle. And they also refer, when they're talking about shamanistic plants, ayahuasca, Brugmansia, and so on, they talk about the soul of the plant as being like a leader, like otinkami would be like the leader or the chief. And I'm going to talk about this a bit later, but with tobacco, there's it's by coincidence, but it just so happens that the word for soul, isire, is very similar to the word for his tobacco, isere. It's a linguistic coincidence. And they talk about this as well, that the tobacco, isere, is the soul of the shaman. He transmits. So when you take tobacco with a shaman, the tobacco, isere, transmits his soul, isire, to you. So the soul is transmitted through this physical substance. And these are examples of how these indigenous concepts about what constitutes the body, what constitutes the soul, they're very different than what our Western philosophical tradition is based on. And so, going back to Descartes, cogito ergo sum, Descartes divided the substances in the universe into three types. There's res extensa, those things that exist extended through space, material things. There is res cogitans, which are the mental things, which would be mind and so on. And then God is a separate category, infinita, res infinita. And you see when the words that we use to describe psychoactive plants fall into these different categories, where most of them, psychedelic, psychotomimetic, hallucinogenic, psychoactive, mind-altering, they emphasize the mental states. Narcotic emphasizes the physical state, and then entheogen emphasizes the godliness of these plants. The Machiguenga won't have any of this. Their word for psychoactive plants is just Keppigati, which means basically poison, that which intoxicates. And the term Keppigati, Matsigenka is a agglutinative language, so you have these word roots that then add on multiple meanings as they get different affixes and suffixes. So piga, this root in the middle of Keppigati. Keppigati means poison, that was nice, but it really means to return, to go back and come to the same place, to spin on an axis, therefore, by extension, to feel dizzy or nauseous, because you feel like you're spinning, therefore, to intoxicate or become intoxicated, and then poisonous, intoxicating, it should say and psychoactive substance. And so their concept of what we would call a psychoactive plant is a very physical thing. It's intoxicating. They don't distinguish between the physical effects and the mental effects or the spiritual effects. It's all one thing. Medicines, and especially psychoactive plants, are poisons. And it's through this intoxication of the body that we can't get away from our concepts. You intoxicate the body to release the soul, but for them it's all one thing. And so in this talk, I want to present a number of ethnographic examples and ethnobotanical examples of how these people understand the mind/body effects of these plants, and in the end, reflect on how we can think about these things in new ways. And so, just a quick lesson in geography. This is, here we are. I can't get this thing to work. Anyway, here we are, Peru. We've been talking about up here, Iquitos, northern Peru. I'm way down in southern Peru, down on the border of Bolivia and Brazil, Manu National Park. And it's a region, it's a national park, but it has a very large indigenous population and a very rich and sort of tragic history. It was originally populated by the Toyeri and the Mashkopiro people, but they were essentially wiped out at the turn of the century by the rubber barons, by Fitzcarraldo. And all these other people, then Ashaninkas and Panoan peoples and the Piro and the Machigenga came to fill this demographic void left by the rubber tappers. Anyone who's seen Werner Herzog's wonderful film Fitzcarraldo, this is the Isthmus of Fitzcarraldo, this right here. He took his boat across the Machiguenga River into the headwaters of the Manu River in 1894. And so this is the living legacy of Fitzcarraldo. And so the main two indigenous groups in the Manu Park, when I first started working, were the Matsigenka. They're Arawakan-speaking peoples. They wear these kushmas. They're sort of tall and thin. And they sort of filled in the demographic void left by these people who were wiped out in the 1920s. And then the Panoan peoples, the Nahua peoples, who moved in from sort of Purus River region, Brazil, from the north. And they just basically, the Machiguenga migrated from the south, the Panoans to the north, until they ran into each other. And they were at war with each other for the whole 20th century. And so, because I have a little bit more time than in usual talks, I'm going to try to present some of the stuff that I've done before. Some of you may have seen this, but just to give the background of the research. And so my thesis research was basically, I was doing a comparative study. You have these two groups of people living in the same environment. They're 20, 30 miles from each other. And yet they were at war with each other, so they didn't really interact much, except by shooting arrows at each other. So I was interested in seeing, well, how do they, you have these two cultures, different language families, how do they understand the forest, how do they use the plants? And what I found was that sensory perception, focusing on medicinal plants and shamanic plants, and sensory perception, the taste, the odor, the texture, smell, this was all very important in how they understood how they selected the plants. Why is this plant medicine? Because it's bitter, because it's astringent, because it has a fragrant odor, because it smells like a peccary, because it's got spines. Those sensory properties were very important in understanding how the plant works, and how they understand the etiology. This plant works because it enters the body and does these things. And so this took me into the world of sensory anthropology, which is an area, a subfield of anthropology that explores the cultural variations. We think of senses being 5 senses, but I had an encounter with this of how different cultures perceive, how different cultures categorize the senses when I was in the forest collecting plants with this buddy of mine, Douglas Yu. He's an ecologist from Harvard, was from Harvard. Now he's here in England at East Anglia University. And so Marino, my old buddy Marino, he scraped this bark of this tree, and it smelled exactly like a fart. It was horrible. It's a lauraceae that smells, they call it palo de miel. It smells exactly like a fart. And he gives it to me, and I smell it, and I go, oh man, I gotta show this to Douglas. So I said, hey Douglas, I put the thing under his nose, I said, listen to this. And Doug goes, Shepard, you've been taking too much ayahuasca. It's like your senses have gotten all crossed. You're telling me to listen to the smell? I had been taking too much ayahuasca, but actually what was going on is that I'd gotten so used to speaking Machiguenga, I'd speaking the language all this time, that I was using their vocabulary. And what happens in Machiguenga is when you say, smell this, the word that you use is actually listen to this odor, because the Machiguenga language divides the senses into 2 main categories. There's nea, the verb root nea, which means to see, to recognize, to know. And I'll talk later about the shamanic kind of seeing, true seeing, which is ne, sano means truth. So this is like a complex word that means true seeing. And then all the other senses, hearing, feeling, and smelling, tasting, come under this verb kema, which means the basic is to hear, then by extension to understand, to obey. But also when you've just eaten a meal and you say, I'm full, you say, kemaka, I feel it in my stomach. And then when you say, again, it's a gluten language, enka is the verb, there's a word root for smoke, gas, vapor, odor, language, anything that's invisible, that's in a gaseous state. And so kema inkagansi means literally to listen to or to hear the odor or the vapor of something. So that was my experience with how your vocabulary goes native. And so when I was working with the Machiguenga and the Nahua healers and collecting plants, what I really wanted for every plant, I wanted to know not only what the plant is, the botany of it, and what it's used for, but what sense property does the plant have? Why is this plant a medicine? And they were very effective at telling me why this was. And it was very interesting. And then I sort of compared, I had a robust sample of Machiguenga plants, 740 collections, 538 collections among the Nahua. And when you look at this graph, this is Machiguenga yellow, Nahua blue. You can see that for the Machiguenga taste, And then irritation, which would be pungency, things, causticity, chemical irritation, were very important. Not very much for the Nahua. For the Machiguenga, for the Nahua, visual spines, visual things very important, color, less so for the Machiguenga. And both of them, odor very important. So you could see that there was a very different cultural approach to medicinal plants in the two cultures. One of them, the Machiguenga really focused on bitter plants. Of all the plants that I collected, the single most common chemical sensory property given for medicinal plants was bitterness. 22% of all plants that I collected among Machiguenga, they said the property is bitter. When you add bitterness plus chemical irritation, causticity, pungency, in all 49%, basically half of the plants that they use, they're selecting for these powerful, astringent, bitter, toxic kind of compounds that they're looking for. And this has to do with the way they understand illness. They consider illness to be these nice microscopic worms. They call them someti, just like they would call earthworms or intestinal worms. But they say these are different worms. These are teeny tiny little worms. You can't see them. They're sort of like our concept of microbes. And these worms get into your body, and you have to put these poisonous, caustic, astringent, toxic, bitter things to kill or hurt. They say that the worm feels just like if you take a bitter plant, it hurts you. It makes you feel bad. It makes you feel sick. If you take chili peppers, it makes you recoil from the pain. It says illnesses are the same way. The little worms, you put something bitter, it makes them feel bad. It makes them feel sick. You put something caustic or pungent, it hurts them, and you get them out of the body. So basically, it's like an allopathic model of efficacy, where you in order to cure the ills of the body, you poison it with these toxic plants that expel the illness. And this idea that the okitsunigaki osiri, when you boil a medicinal plant in water, the soul of the plant infuses the water and then your body. So the soul of the plant is inseparable from the pharmacological properties. When I compared it to the Nahua system of medicine, couldn't have been more different. As I said, visual cues were responsible for 33%. A third of their plants were visually motivated. It had spines, it has a colorful leaf, and less than 5% of their plants are bitter. And when you look at the Machiguenga ingest a full 33% of their medicines are ingested, so they know what they taste like. The Nahua, less than 5% of their medicine ingested. They don't know what they taste like because they never ingest them. Why don't they ingest them? Well, for them, the Nahua say that the illness comes from the plant. So you're walking in the forest, you go by this spiny plant, and the spiny plant has a spirit owner that is a wasp. And you're walking by, minding your business, and that wasp attacks you for no reason. Just like a wasp attacks you, there's no reason. They just want to attack you because they're aggressive. And you get sick. And the only way to heal yourself, and it causes there's a bunch of different wasp plants, and each one they cause inflammation, they cause pain, they cause bleeding. And each plant, each illness, each wasp illness is associated with a specific wasp plant. And so you have to find the right wasp plant to treat the wasp illness. And you apply that plant externally. And they say it's like a magnet. Because the plant is the same, the illness comes from the plant. So if you've got heart pain caused by this specific wasp medicine, you put the plant, you make a warm plaster, you put it outside, and it draws the illness, the wasp, out of your body by virtue of like treats like a magnet. And then the vapor coming off your body is that spirit going back to the forest. And so they have a concept of medicine as poison, but it's a very different concept of medicine as poison, because the medicine and the illness are exactly the same thing. And so you treat the illness by taking a small dose of that poison and putting on the outside. And that's why you don't ingest the plant. If you were to ingest the plant, you'd be ingesting the illness. And this, most of their medicines are applied externally, and less than 4% are ingested. So this is very, very homeopathic, sort of like treats like illness model. How am I doing with time? I know everyone wants to get to the hallucinogens. I'm getting there. I just want to give some of the cultural background. So, as I said, in both groups, odor is very important for medicines, and especially for the Nahua, they have this whole category of fragrant medicines. They're very preoccupied with bodily odors. They want to disguise unpleasant body odors. And the worst smell of all is this smell these stinking corpse wraiths. They are people who have died and weren't buried properly, and they become these zombie wraiths walking through the forest, and they smell like rotten flesh. It's supposed to be the worst smell in existence. And so there's probably 2 or 3 dozen fragrant plants they put in these armbands. They use vanilla, they use this wild basil scutularia, they use a bunch of fragrant eraceae flowers, and they put them in their arms, and it's both to attract. Pusanga in the Peruvian Amazon is love magic. It's what you use to attract lovers. And so it's like Pusanga, but for them it's not just about attracting lovers, it's about keeping away these illness-causing spirits, like the corpse wraiths and the other spirits that cause illness. They say that when someone kills an animal and they're burning the fur, you have to burn the fur off before you cook the animal, and that burnt fur smell can go up into your nose and down into your stomach and make you sick. And so to treat it, you need to get plants that imitate that burnt fur smell, and you put them on your belly to pull it out. And during the ayahuasca ceremony, the Nahua smell wild basil in order to bring these pleasant spirits, because by wearing these fragrant perfumes in their arms, they're imitating, there's these spirit beings called the Shoba, who live in the forest, and their bodies are fragrant without having to use any kind of perfumes. They're just fragrant beings. And so by using these fragrant plants, they're imitating the fragrant bodies of the Shoba. And this goes, there's a lot of, Werner Wilbert, the son of Johannes Wilbert, the tobacco shamanism specialist, he's written a paper about the pneumatic illness concepts, how all through the Amazon you find this concept of illness as being these pathogenic bad smells, and then therapeutic agents will bring positive, good smells counteract bad smells, and that's how you get healing. And as I said, in Machiguenga, Enka, it means odor, vapor, smoke, mist, and language. You hear an odor. And there's a number of illnesses that they say in the early rainy season, you get this mist that comes out of the sky that brings down the accumulated illnesses, and it brings those illnesses to earth. And yellow vapor in the sky is this sort of coloration the sky gets in the late rainy season. And when it rains after that, they say that it brings illness into the water. If you think about it, late dry season. So at the very end of the dry season, the sky's full of particles, and the ground, of course, is full of accumulated feces. And then with the first rains, all that accumulated feces goes into the water. And they say right after the first rains, you start getting sick. And they say it's this yellow vapor in the sky comes down and contaminates us. In Peru, there's this concept of Cutipa in Amazonia. Cutipa means vengeful spirits. It's a spirit revenge. It comes from, I think, from a Quechua word that means to exchange, to pay back. And in Machiguenga, they call it fuigasetagansi, which means when you hunt an animal with a very strong odor, like a male animal with a scent gland, when you kill the animal spirit comes back as that odor and attacks your children. And so for example, a hunter goes out and he kills a monkey, a woolly monkey, a male woolly monkey, the big curaca, the big male woolly monkey. And that male woolly monkey has this strong male sort of scent odor from the male scent glands that animals have. And the animal spirit comes back as that odor. And the young baby will smell that odor and get sick, will cry, will have rashes, will get diarrhea. And so what the woman does is she takes all of these odorous plants, leaves, and piri, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and this whole concoction of plants. And every day for about the first 3 months of the kid's life, she bathes the baby 3 times a day with these odorous plants to create like an odorous force field of fragrant odors to protect them from all these malignant odors that come in from the forest. Okay, now's the part everyone wants to hear about. It's hallucinants. We're there. So ayahuasca, the Quechua word, ayahuasca, the vine of the soul. There's all these etymologies. I'm not going to get right to the point. This stuff is called vomiting medicine, kamarampi. Kamaranka to vomit, hampi medicine. And they consider it to be Keppigati, poisonous, toxic, and of course Keppishiri. Now, these days the Matsigenka mix the Banisteriopsis with Psychotria like everybody else. But they did not use Psychotria as an admixture until very recently. They seem to have had ayahuasca for some time because they have more than 7 different cultivars. And they say that before they learned about Psychotria, they they drank it alone, well, not alone, they drank ayahuasca mixed with other things. So they seem to have gotten ayahuasca vine, and the Psychotria grows there, they just didn't know how to use it. And so they mixed Banisteriopsis vine for about 8 to 10 hours. It's a much longer boiling process. They say they reduce it to a honey-like consistency, and they would mix it with different plants like Phytonia albavanus, with Geoganthus pepigi, which are ornamental plants you can find in any florist probably in England. And they said, well, it's got these pretty veins on the leaves, and those are the things that come into the visions, and the coloration of the leaves that affects the vision. So this could be what they call doctrine of signatures, just a symbolic association, or who knows if anyone wants to go out and see if there's any psychoactive things in these plants. And nowadays, and the funny thing is, these days, they'll add these things to the Psychotria ayahuasca mixture sometimes, just sort of in remembrance of old times. But they say that making it with Psychotria is much more efficient. Rather than having to boil it for 8 to 10 hours, you boil it in 4 hours. And they learned, the curious thing is they learned Psychotria. It grew there, but they didn't know how to use it. They learned it from the same Machiguenga guide who brought them Protestant missionaries. So he brought Protestant missionaries and ayahuasca at the same time. And so when they were first contacted in the 1960s, this Machiguenga guide who was bringing the Protestant missionaries said, hey, you guys take ayahuasca, you don't know about this stuff? And so they call it to this day Urubambashi, because not the leaf itself, it grows there, but the knowledge came from this Urubamba River Machiguengas. But the curious thing is I've collected the hell out of this thing, collected it all I can, and it is not viridis. It is consistently, every time I come up with viridis, they say, that's the same, that's Urubambashi, but that's the bat Urubambashi. That's the stuff the Shipibo use. We don't use that. That's bad stuff. It makes you see bats and snakes and all these bad things. They say, we use this other thing, and it's like, I've collected them dozens of times. You lay them in the herbarium, and every time it's viridis, it's bat. It's either bat or snake Urubambashi. It's either bat or snake Psychotria. And the one that they use is this thing that I haven't been able to identify yet. It's a slightly different variety. It's in the Chicago Field Museum. If someone can tell me what it is, I'd appreciate it. So talking about the sensory world around ayahuasca use, one thing, let's just play a little bit of this. I hope it works. This is a one-stringed violin. They call it a musical bow, I think, in the Amazon. And you can hear people whoosh. So is the ayahuasca, no, I can't turn it off. Oops. So as the ayahuasca comes on, they will play these pegompis. And the word pegompi, pega is the root for transformation. And so the pegompi means the instrument of transformation. And they say that it speaks the language of these invisible spirits called the sangariti. Sanka means clean, like clean water, but also invisible. So transparent, lucid, clean. And they say that when you play the pegompi beautifully, it's Mckenna. It has a beautiful odor or a beautiful vapor that emerges from it, and it draws the spirits from the forest with that beautiful odor, beautiful vapor, beautiful language. And it calls the spirits, and that's how the songs come. You take ayahuasca, and while you're waiting for the spirits to come who bring the songs, you play the pegompi, and that's what draws them to you. That's their language. And it's sort of hypnotic. Let's listen to it a little bit more. I love it. Let's see if I can get it going. Oh, it won't go. Anyway, and then going back to this idea of true seeing, the verb ne means to see. Sano is this root that means true. There it is in the middle. So ne sano tagansi means true seeing. And the way you obtain true seeing is you have to take ayahuasca in the absolute darkness. And there's a related word, ne sankagatsi. Sankarite, like I said, sankarite are the invisible spirits of the forest. When you look into clear water, you say ne sankataki. You're seeing through clear water. So the word, this root sanka means both, it means transparent, invisible, but also clean and pure. Like looking into a mirror, looking through water. And so when the Machiguenga take ayahuasca, they do it always in the rainy season. And they always do it in complete dark. You can have even a flashlight or a watch anything that's going to make any light, because they say, and they go through the entire little village, hamlet area, and they put out every single fire. They don't water on the fire. It's the only time they put out all the fires, because they don't want any spark of light, because they say any spark of light could burn your soul, and it gets in the way of true seeing. And so the way you obtain true seeing is by blocking out ordinary sight completely. You can't see anything. It's pitch dark. It's in the rainy season, and you take ayahuasca to open up your eyes to the true seeing. Now, the Nahua, going back to the Nahua, they weren't, like I said, they were at war with the Machiguenga for the whole 20th century. They were finally contacted in 1985. Half the population died. It was a very traumatic event. Shell oil was prospecting in the region. Loggers came in, and they were contacted. There was no health care, and half the population died of colds and whooping cough and other things between the 1985 contact and in 1990. I worked with them in 1996. Prior to that contact, they did not have ayahuasca at all. They didn't know about the vine or the psychoactive or anything. They used this Paulinia, which I collected but can never get a fertile sample. I don't know what it is. Some kind of Paulinia. They call it tsibo, which means astringent. It's a very astringent plant. And they say they would take it, and they say it wouldn't have really clear visions, but you sort of see spirits, you see things, but it was highly, highly toxic. And if you ate any kind, you had to really talk about dieta. If you ate any weird kind of fish or peccary or tapir, anything a little bit different you'd eat with this, you get these huge lesions on your body, skinny lesions. And there's this one guy who walks around with this huge rash. It's like a gigantic, it's not leishmaniasis, but it looks like a huge leishmaniasis thing on his whole leg. And they say because before contact, he took this Paulinia and then ate some kind of catfish. Once they got ayahuasca, the Yaminawa shaman, the Yaminawa man who sort of negotiated, he could speak enough of their language, he negotiated their contact with the outside world. He was a shaman, and he introduced them to ayahuasca in 1985. And there's a film about this called, I think it's called A Shaman's Apprentice, about the initiation of the Nahua headman by the Yaminawa leader. And it was his way of sort of taking dominance over the group. And now they have become complete fanatics of ayahuasca. They take ayahuasca. When I was there in 1996, they took it every day. You couldn't find ayahuasca for miles and miles around in the forest. They just took it every single day. And they use the wild species. The Machiguenga use the cultivated species. They use the wild species. It's much weaker. When my Machiguenga friend took it with him, it's like drinking masato. It's not really very strong. It creates a sort of milder state of inebriation so that they can sing their songs. When my Machiguenga buddy made his ayahuasca, the Nahua couldn't sing. Like, oh, that stuff's too strong. I can't sing. We want to be able to sing. And their healing songs, it's interesting. They have these really amazing healing songs they're couplets. They're poetic couplets, improvised poetic couplets of two statements that are sort of similar, that have internal rhymes. And as they go through these couplets, these sort of conceptually rhyming couplets, in their songs, when they're treating things like fevers, for example, they'll sing out to guns and motors and helicopters and gasoline, chainsaws. They sing to all of these objects from Western culture that are hot and have these strong smells. And they say that's what causes malaria and colds, all these new illnesses they didn't have before that are associated with very high fevers. They say they come from these hot objects that white people have bought. And so in their shamanistic rituals, they will sing poetic couplets to these hot objects. And the idea is that they sing to these objects and they gather them together, and then they'll blow their cooling breath on them, their cooling, fragrant breath, to dispel the heat and heal the illness. And so once again, the idea is that, well, white people illnesses, homeopathy, come from white people objects. So to heal those white people illnesses, we need to call together the sort of the spirits of these white people objects and then dispel them. And these they can be these incredibly beautiful poems that they sing. And this is a translation that I did of one of the songs. Whose illness is this? The flaming illness of lightning. Its hot fire burns, its white smoke, its boiling fever. The owners of metal, the white people from downriver. The metal people are burning, the metal knives are burning, the smell of hot steel. What strange people are these? Their illness goes to the far reaches, the headwaters of the snaking river. None can escape the fever. How will we put out this fire? And so they repeat these couplets, and then at the end of it, he'll call together the fragrant cooling spirits and dispel these things. So neither of these people really used ayahuasca as we know it until very recently. What did they use before? Well, for the Machiguenga, it's tobacco that's the true shaman's substance, not ayahuasca. Ayahuasca's come more recently. And and it hurts. It hurts. And the property of tobacco that they appreciate is katsi. Katsi is what they use to describe chili peppers or things like really strong smelling Dr. Bronner's soap, they say, is katsi because it's got this strong sort of camphor odor. And tobacco is katsi. Katsi just means painful. We say, oh, it's hot, it's chili pepper, it's spicy, it's pungent. They get right down to the point. It's painful. And so as Evgenia was mentioning, the Machiguenga word for shaman is just seri, tobacco. We all remember pigati, remember from the beginning? Piga, to spin, to turn, to be intoxicated. So seri pigati just means the one intoxicated by tobacco. That's the word for shamanism. So there's this direct association. They use different forms. Snuff, there's this tobacco paste, which is, it's ayahuasca and tobacco boiled together for hours until it turns into this horribly bitter black paste. And again, the idea is they make this sort of folk etymology. They see, Isire, the shaman's soul, Isire, is his sere. Isere, Isire. They make this poetic association. The words aren't related etymologically, but they see this similarity that reinforces their idea that when a master shaman takes his tobacco paste, he will eat his tobacco paste, he'll swallow it, and then he'll regurgitate it and kiss his apprentice and pass the regurgitated tobacco to his apprentice's mouth, which the apprentice then swallows. And they say, I've seen them do this. And they say, he's passing his soul, his tobacco, his soul. So he swallows the tobacco, he puts it into his body, deep into his body, then regurgitates it and sends it to his apprentice and transfers a little, he says it's like a little piece of his soul, like a seed. They take a little piece of his soul, a seed from his soul, and plants it in your soul through the tobacco as a substance. And when you take tobacco snuff, the idea is that the stronger, the more painful, the more katsi, the more pungent the snuff, the more powerful the shaman's soul is. And when a shaman blows tobacco, either just during the day or during ayahuasca ceremonies especially, by blowing tobacco into you, that substance, that tobacco, that toxic substance, transmits the shaman's soul to you. So again, the idea that the soul can have a physical form that can enter the body, can leave the body, can go into other bodies. Now, the most powerful toxic substance among the Machiguenga is Brugmansia suaveolens. They call it hayapa or saro, or they just call it Keppigati, because it is the most toxic thing in their pharmacopoeia. It's considered the most toxic, one of the most dangerous things, but also one of the most important things. It's used for shamanic initiation. When a young shaman decides to go down that path, they'll give him a 3 or 4 day dose of Brugmansia, let him wander in the forest for a couple days, and there he'll make this contact with the spirits, the small, little people spirits. And then when he comes back and takes ayahuasca, or she, in the old days, there were female shamans. And my theory is that the arrival of ayahuasca brought this sort of mestizo, more male-oriented tradition. And today they're not female Machiguenga shamans, but in the old days when it was just tobacco without psychotria, ayahuasca without psychotria, tobacco, and Brugmansia, there was an equal number of male and female shamans, and they've sort of gone by the wayside. I don't understand why that happened. But anyway, they say that when anyone takes Brugmansia, you'll hear in the headwaters, saptering. It's not thunder, it's not lightning, it's the special sound of those portals opening up. And they say, whenever anyone takes, you can listen for it. When we hear that sound, someone's taken Brugmansia somewhere. And they say it's a special sound. They've pointed out to me, and they say it's not thunder, it's not an animal, it's this special sound, saptering of the portal opening for the person to go into the other world. But in addition to this shamanic use to sort of open the portals of communication with the spirit beings, it's also used for extreme illnesses like a snake bite or a really bad fall from a tree, real severe illness. They will take Brugmansia to put the person into a state of coma, like medically induced coma. And when the shaman takes Brugmansia or ayahuasca, the initiates, they go to special places in the forest. And it's a really interesting thing because these special, you can see there's like a little clearing around this tree. And it's actually an ant-plant symbiosis. My buddy Doug, the ecologist, was fascinated by this because he works with ant-plant symbiosis. And it's an ant-plant symbiosis between this plant called Cordia nodosa and these ant species. And they create, the ants will sort of clear the area around this tree. And in exchange, the tree gives them little nodes where they can make houses. And so the plant has these little structures called domatia, where the ants live. And so the Machiguenga are aware of this ant-plant symbiosis, but they say, and you can see the little cleared area around it. They say, when you take Brugmansia or ayahuasca and you come here, this becomes a huge village where the spirits live. And that's where they go to get new varieties of crops, manioc varieties. They get new varieties of medicinal plants. They say the spirits give them these new varieties, and they take them and plant them in their garden. And I've met one shaman who says, I brought back 4, and my master brought back 7, and we still have them. He went to the forest, took this stuff, and came back with a new variety of manioc. Also, when they're in this village clearing, this invisible spirit clearing village, they will negotiate with the owners of the hunting animals. They said the hunting animals are their pets. Like we have dogs and cats and chickens. Well, their hunting animal, their pets are peccaries and curassows and all these game animals. So they'll do deals with these spirits, and the spirits say, well, I'll let you have some of my chickens, which are their curassows or other birds, or I'll let you have my pigs, which are their, the peccaries. And so they'll negotiate with these spirit, and during this process, they say you create a spirit twin. So when the shaman prepares ayahuasca or Brugmansia in this world, they have a spirit twin who's doing it at the same time. They both prepare at the same time, and they switch places. So Brugmansia, like I said, it's used for shamanic initiation, but also it's a very important medicinal plant for extreme illnesses. And this is a friend of mine, Jaime. I met him when he was just a young boy, and then I came back, and he was a hunchback. What happened to you, Jaime? Well, he fell out of a tree. He was hunting monkeys, climbed up the tree, the monkey was dead, grabbing onto the branch, and it rained, and he slipped and fell out of the tree and broke his back in 5 or 6 places. And they came, and they got him, and they brought him back very carefully to the village in a mat. And the shaman of the village gave him a huge dose of Brugmansia. And he said he was out for a week. And when he woke up, the shaman said, how you feeling? It hurts. Another dose, another week. Woke up, how you feeling? It's a little bit better, but it still hurts. Another dose. And so he was in a state of coma, of medically induced coma, for a month. And atropine in Brugmansia has atropine. It reduces swelling. Scopolamine is an anesthetic. It's an amnesiac, so it sort of kills pain. And he says that during this time, he was taken to this faraway city, and there's all these medical doctors around him. And there was this woman with he'd seen people soldering, like when they would take their boat to be fixed, not soldering, welding a peki cola on the peki, and says it was just like those guys who welded the peki colas, the boat tails on, and they were soldering they were welding my spine back together. And after a month of being in this state of coma, his bones fused. Obviously, he's a hunchback, but he's alive, And they said, no, if we take him out on the boat, he would have died. So Brugmansia literally saved his life, and it put him in a state of physiological coma for long enough for his bones to weld together. And now he has basically a normal life. No Western medicine at all, just Brugmansia. So they really believe that when people get bitten by a snake, or they have a really severe illness, this is the last resort. But there's the other side. I've written an article called The Path of Day of Light, The Path of Day and Night, in a recent book. And it came from this. This is a Shipibo fabric that I bought in Pucallpa. And it's called, the name on the back of the artwork is The Path of Day and Night, El Camino del Día y de la Noche. And it shows a red snake and a black snake intertwined with the leaves of Brugmansia. It doesn't show the flower, but the leaves are very clearly growing along the body of the snake. And so even, all through the Amazon, this plant is considered to be a very powerful plant, but also very dangerous. And so this young man, Thomas, he was the brightest young man in the village. He went off to study in Puerto Maldonado in the local city. He wanted to become a nurse sanitario, like a nurse health practitioner, but it was such a culture shock being in Puerto Maldonado. He wasn't prepared academically and ended up coming home. He couldn't finish his degree. And he sort of came home disgraced. He started having psychological problems, and he started using Toei as an escape. He started taking Toei all the time. He was taking it every week, and finally he just turned up dead one day. And they said, yeah, the Toei just took him away. So while they respect it greatly and they resort to it to solve very serious health problems, and they're very aware of the doses. It's like, they say, they take out the pith, scrape out the pith and boil it, distill it in a leaf and steam, and say this much one night, this much of the tallo, of the stem, that much a week, that much one night, that much 3 days, 1 week, 1 month, forever. So you got to be very careful with this stuff. Don't try this at home, as they say. Another solanaceous plant loaded with tropane alkaloids is Brunfelsia, which has been mentioned before. They call it chirisanango in the Peruvian Amazon. And the Machiguenga use this for hunting. In fact, the main use that the Machiguenga give for ayahuasca isn't healing, it's for hunting. They take ayahuasca during the rainy season to become good hunters, because most of their hunting is on the rainy season. And so Brunfelsia is one of their main hunting plants. And the reason they call it chirisanango in Peru, chiri I think means cold in Quechua, and when you take it, it gives you this feeling of cold and tingling, like pins and needles in your fingers and toes. And they say that the hunter will take a big dose of this, so much that you can't even walk. It's painful to walk because you get this like tingling sensation, and you'll be sort of out of it for 3, 4 hours, 8 hours. You can have dreams. It's somewhat psychoactive, but not nearly like Brunfelsia. And when it's done, that tingling sensation, the needle pricking sensation, they say that's the spirit of the harpy eagle, which enters your body and makes you a great hunter. And so there are 3 or 4 species, folk species they recognize. And some are good for monkey hunting, other are good for fishing. But there's one species that no one's ever showed me because they say it's super dangerous because it makes you such a good hunter that you turn into a jaguar. And you can't use this plant. So I haven't been able to collect it because everyone's too afraid to collect it. Another hunting plant that was mentioned, someone mentioned this, Juanuyoya, I think you mentioned it?
Yeah, a different species.
Juanuyoya parasitica, that it's basically like a vine Brugmansia. It's very similar, it looks very much, they call it the vine Brugmansia. It's like a vine nightshade. And it's super, super toxic. They say they don't give it to people, they give it to dogs. They'll take a dog and they'll get, you can see, this is a video still from that movie, Spirit Hunters. But you can see little bits of peccary, fur, spines, what they call them, they're like little peccary fur. And so what they do is they'll take the scent gland from a peccary, they'll take the skin of a peccary, and they'll take these narcotic plants and they'll mix them together and pour them down the nostril of the dog, and the dog will be in a stupor for hours or days. But it imprints this, and they use plants that smell, they say, there's certain plants they say, oh, this smells like peccary, this smells like tapir. Or this is a plant that the tapir eats. And they'll put those plants that have smells that are associated with the animals, mix them with narcotics, and they'll give them the dogs to imprint in the dog's sensory system that odor so that they can go hunting for them. Now the most interesting and the least studied plant in all of this is Cyperus, which was mentioned in passing. Piri in the Peruvian Amazon. And the Matsigenka call it Ibenkiki. And Cyperus is the family of papyrus. It's the same family that the Egyptians made paper from. If you look through the pharmacological literature throughout the world, it's one of the least used medicinal families in the entire world. It has nothing. It's got nothing going for it. No alkaloids, nothing. It's just pulp for paper. And yet, the Machiguenga and everybody in the Peruvian and Brazilian, all indigenous peoples use this thing. It's like the ginseng. It's a panacea. There's all these multiple varieties. There's for childbirth, to have children, not to have children, for headache, to cure insanity. If you take this one, it causes insanity. You can get rid of bad dreams. It cures wounds and snake bites. You can become a good singer, a good weaver, a good hunter, better fisherman. Bickering spouses take it to stop bickering. There's even a special one they call soldado benki. Soldado is soldier in Spanish. Soldado benki, soldier piri, is so that you can go through military checkpoints without being searched, because it calms you down. So you think, this has got to be pure superstition, right? It's this plant with no activity at all, and no alkaloids, and yet they use it for all these. Well, it turns out that the wild version of Piri has flowers. I did some research, called the guy in Indiana who studies the wild Piri in the States. Cattle ranchers hate them because they've got small amounts. There's an endophyte, there's a fungal endophyte that's from the Claviseptaceae family. The same family as rye ergot, the same family as LSD. It infects the wild plants in very small quantities. Apparently it helps them defend themselves against other worse things. But when cattle eat a bunch of this stuff, they'll get drunk and fall down and break their legs or drown. And so the cattle ranchers in Texas hate this stuff because there's a thing called cattle staggers. Cattle eat this stuff and they get sick and they can die. Well, if you look at the cultivated sedges used by the Machiguenga, there's no flower left. And the word for Machiguenga, the Machiguenga word is ibenkiki, which means it's this little button. And that button is fungal endophyte. So what the indigenous people of the Amazon have done is they have taken this naturally occurring fungal endophytes, ergot-containing fungal endophytes, and they've, through cultivation and planting, they don't plant the seeds, they plant the roots. Through cloning, basically, they've upped the levels of these fungal endophytes to the point where there's no flower left. This plant cannot reproduce itself. You can't identify things in their barren because there's no flower left. So they've upped the level of fungal endophytes to the point where there's no flowers and they're just loaded with ergot alkaloids. And if you think about what the ergot alkaloids do, why did Hoffman discover ergot alkaloids? They were trying to make the pill because ergotism causes abortions, ergotism causes gangrene because it causes vasoconstriction, it causes hallucinations. So if you look at these things, controlling fertility, affecting the contractions of the uterus. Headache, vasoconstriction. We use ergot as a migraine cure. Curing or causing insanity, bad dreams, wounds and snake bites. If you get bitten by a snake and put ergot on it, it contracts your blood vessels so the venom doesn't go into your veins. So all of these uses are completely understandable once you figure out that this thing is loaded with ergot. And so I'm coming towards the end of my time in my talk. And so, I mean, you've seen how, looking at the Machiguenga versus the Nahua, there's these plants in their environment, the plants have the chemicals they have, and yet they're, from their very different cultural positions, the Machiguenga and the Nahua have approached their pharmacopoeia in completely different ways. In the sense of, the Machiguenga go for the bitter things, the toxic things, the Nahua go for the fragrant things and the things with visual cues to them. And so from what Evgeny was saying about cultural construction, I think I'm sort of paraphrasing here, but there's an article by Viveros de Castro where he talks about substances. And he basically is saying it's not the substance, it's the relations that they create. So, tobacco, for the indigenous shamans of the Amazon, it's not the tobacco, the nicotine in it, it's the relations that it creates between shamans, human relations, or spiritual relations. And so, and you can see, and if you go to like the world ayahuasca diaspora, where you've got people taking it, you've got the sort of vegetalismo, the traditional vegetalismo that Luis Eduardo Luna has worked on so importantly. You've got these ayahuasca religions in Brazil and this sort of tourism industry. It's the same substance, and yet the uses are completely different. So do the substances matter at all? An anthropologist coming from a cultural construction would say, no, the substance doesn't matter. But yet we know, those of you who are chemists and botanists, the substances do matter. Because the reason psychoactive plants are psychoactive is because they contain these substances whose three-dimensional structure mimics neurotransmitters. The difference between scopolamine and atropine, they're two tropane alkaloids, they're the same thing. The only thing that's different is their three-dimensional shape, their chirality. And they have different effects because of their different shapes. So how can we put together this view of, well, culture matters, culture changes the context of these things, and yet the substances matter as well. And thinking about, from the very beginning of the talk, for the Machiguenga and other Amazon peoples, there is no difference between mind and body. They're the same thing. So how do we avoid falling into the Cartesian trap of always separating mind from body? And I found that I came across this really curious article by this Brazilian botanist, chemist named Otto Gottlieb. It's a really obscure little article, but I read it and it got me thinking. And he says, we tend to think of alkaloids and polyphenols and all these things as plant defenses, like, the plants defend themselves from predators by creating these alkaloids and these polyphenols so that things don't eat them. He says, no. If if you look at the life, the cycle of plants and how these things function originally, he says, their original function was not attraction, defense, or any other ecological function, but is membrane construction, that these molecules are involved. First and foremost, they were things that could go across membranes, cell membranes. And then from there, because they can communicate across cell membranes, they end up influencing the morphology of the creatures and then up to the sort of biogeographical level, evolutionary level. And so then he goes on to say that considering the way they're constructed, low mass, polarity, chirality, he says what these things really started out as is messengers of information across cell membranes, first and foremost. And then through evolutionary processes, natural selection, things that were effective deterrents to predators, or that could cause diarrhea to help disperse the seeds, whatever, that comes secondarily. But primarily, that these bioactive molecules communicate information. So how can we think about this taking into account, he's a biochemist, but thinking about into culture, we can think about these chemicals, these psychoactive chemicals or other active biological activities. They start out communicating membrane to membrane within one organism, and then they're capable of communicating among multiple organisms between plants and animals. And then from there to the biosphere level. And then thinking about it from your personal level, so these substances, they first work at the intercellular level within your own neurological system. Then they enter the interpersonal level between human beings, and then to the interdimensional level between beings of different levels. And of course, none of this is new to the vegetalistas that Luis Eduardo worked with and everyone. They're talking about the relation to the aquatic realm, the terrestrial realm, the celestial realm. Different words for the same thing. And the concept that Luis Eduardo came up with so long ago, the concept of plants as teachers, when you think about it this way, this is not a metaphor, because these substances are literally transmitting information across cell walls, across organisms, across, in ecological systems, between people and between spirit beings. And so just to close it out, I'm at the very end of my time here. There's a French philosopher called Merleau-Ponty, who his approach to getting beyond Cartesian dichotomies is through phenomenology, so that you don't think about body and mind as being separate. He says, if you get angry at someone, the traditional sort of philosophical way is like, there's an anger thing that goes off in your brain, you get angry, your mind gets angry, and then you express that anger by shaking and screaming. He says, but no, anger is your body's angry reaction is anger itself, that you can't separate body and mind. And so Merleau-Ponty looks at how if you take the phenomenological approach to sensation, rather than the sense comes in, it sets off a neural thing, and then it fires a response, if you look at it as a sort of a synergistic whole, you can look at mind-body as one single interacting thing. And looking at how the Machiguenga and the Nahua and other peoples understand plants, you see there's a holistic way. The physiological property, the chemosensory properties of plants, the taste, the smell, the odor, the texture, that encompasses all of these things that cut across the boundaries between soul, mind, body, spirit. And so I've sort of looked at sensation as a way of cutting between the ideal world and the material world. And so with that, I say, keep it safe, keep it coming, and keep it katsi. Thank you.